Hey there, Chris Petracchi here, and today we're going to talk about painting the female portrait in Photoshop, and I'll take you through a basic block-in, a value block-in, finishing touches. We'll talk a little bit about my tools, brush presets, workflow, and so on. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, while I'm getting started in toning the canvas, let's talk a little bit about the photo reference. So what I want to do is get things started quickly. So I'm going to use a simple but characteristic shape of a triangle to get the head down quickly on the canvas. If I can get it down quickly and there's any mistakes, I can quickly and easily correct a triangle because it's very simple. It's not complex, and that's what I'm looking for. It's a great tool and it serves me well. So the triangle is a simple but characteristic shape. It's quick to get down, it's easy to fix, and it's clear. If it's clear, I'm not going to get lost and my audience won't get lost easy. It's a clear statement that I can make that the audience will stick with me and hopefully be interested in this piece of art that I'm making. Also, what I've done is I've toned the canvas with 3 swatches, a white, a middle gray, and a dark gray, just to give myself a value range to work in and to keep myself from getting out of control with the values. After I've got that in, kind of blocked in the neck, a little bit of the shoulders, trying to find the average angle of the head, neck, and torso. And so I'm using straight lines and some curved lines, keeping it really simple, just looking for the big idea, the big block in, the big massing in of shapes. So let's talk about getting started and some of the ways that you can help yourself not get stuck. And we've talked about simple and characteristic shapes to get things down quickly, but also I want to stay zoomed out, so to speak. I want to keep my distance, and there's a couple of reasons for this. Mainly not to get caught up in detail. I want to look at things as if I'm 30 feet away, maybe 15 feet away, and I can't see any details. And that way I don't get stuck in the details at all. And I see the big picture, I see the big structures, I see the big statements, what's light, what's dark. And if I can do that and stay there for a while, that's good for me because I'll get more than likely a clear statement. So after blocking in the triangle, then I find the plane of the front of the face and the side of the face and where that plane change is. I'm trying to just break up, find the big plane changes on the head. And so I have the forehead, the cheek, front of the cheek, down to the chin, and then put in the eye line, which is kind of in the center of the face, and find the nose, mouth, and find each individual simple but characteristic shape of each feature of the face and their basic plane breakup as well. So I'm putting in the mouth right now. Basically it's going okay. So I'm not going to adjust any more proportions. I'm going to go ahead and start to establish my line block in here. And this is really fun to do. Portraits, trying to get a likeness. And getting a likeness, the essence of somebody or a character is like magic. You're really creating something out of nothing. And I find that challenging and fun to do. So let's talk just a little bit about brushes in Photoshop. So I'm just using a basic Photoshop brush that's a NuPastel, and you can see on the left side I have tool presets, and those are really handy to have. They're my go-to brushes. And instead of using my brush palette itself and switching out brushes all the time or looking through tons of brushes, I just have my tool presets of my favorite brushes. And you can see under the soft brushes there's NuPastel, various kinds of NuPastel, and charcoal sticks, brushes that simulate NuPastel on newsprint or charcoal paper, Conte on charcoal paper, and charcoal itself. Under the NuPastels I have a charcoal blocky and charcoal soft. And they really simulate natural media. The only thing with the Cintiq is that it's very slick. It's not like drawing on paper. It's not like holding charcoal. So although it looks and simulates the look of real media, the feel just isn't there. So it's one of the drawbacks of going digital and using, digital means for painting. But it's so flexible in so many other ways that it's a give and take. It's a trade-off. So I've been refining the mouth, nose, eyes, and finding the mask of the face, the boundaries of the forehead where the hair starts, the temple, down to the cheek by the ear, and kind of adjusting the ear, because I put that in, it's too big, it's out of place. So I'm finding a guideline from the eyebrow that lines up with the top of the ear. The bottom of the ear lines up with the nose, generally, of a person on average. So I put in kind of a basic disc shape for the ear. Trying to find that flow between the neck and the torso, connecting the head. And that's where the gesture can come in. So you've got the structure of the head and the structure of the torso, and connecting that is that flexible neck. And that's where gesture, curved lines can come in and connect one structure, the head, to the next structure or construction of the torso. So now refining the eye and drawing the lids and trying to describe the spherical surface of the eyeball. So I'm drawing over the eyeball with a curved line and make sure they look like they're wrapping around a ball. And I'm moving around the whole piece. I'm not staying in one place. I like to move around and kind of bring the whole thing up at once. And now I've got enough of the underdrawing or blocking in sufficiently that I'm going to go ahead and put in the value block in. So I'm starting from the middle value and working out. So it helps me control my values that way. So I've got a step darker than middle gray, kind of a middle dark, I would call it. It's the family of darks, and I'll go ahead and put in by squinting down and looking at the 2D puzzle pieces of the dark shapes only, and then just drawing them, really kind of copying them, and kind of block those in with one value overall. And I'm basically deciding what's a dark thing at this point. And that'll help me, by default, find the light, family of lights. So I'm starting to sculpt out and carve out now. And finding the big shapes that I can try to unify. So I want to try and unify these shadow shapes as much as I can and connect them. And if I can connect things, I'm doing my job as an artist, because instead of having a bunch of parts, I'm going to have, hopefully a piece of art at the end that's coherent. Sort of like a song, you can have a bunch of notes, but it's not a song until you really put those notes together in context with chords. And a melody, and then you can have, you're really making a song, you're making art. So I'm taking that NuPastel brush, and it's got kind of a chiseled edge to it, kind of like a hunk of charcoal with a right angle, squared off kind of shape to it, and I can really just broadly place in the dark, big masses of the hair under the chin and the torso. And again, still staying fairly middle dark. I don't want to go to black at this point because I don't want to use up my value range. I'll save my blacks for the black accents at the end, where I want to direct the viewer to look, so I can set up that focal point for my piece. So I'm being careful to stick within the value range and gradually bring it up as if it's somewhat emerging from the page. So at this point, you can see the construction lines in of the initial block in, and that's fine. I like that. I like to leave that in because as you look at a drawing, it's really nice to see all that work in the drawing, and it helps build it up. It makes it interesting. It's kind of like showing evidence or leaving clues as to how the artist got there. And somehow it helps the final render comes out of each stage, built one on top of the other, until you get to a final render. So you're kind of constructing things, conceiving things, finding the planes, the different parts, and eventually that you can get to a final render that way. But I find it just looks really rich when you leave all that stuff in there. That's just a personal preference. So with those eyelids, I like to thicken up that lower part of the lid that creates a shadow over the ball of the eye. And then putting in the iris. And again, it's just a simple shape. I don't want to get into pupils, highlights, really anything like that. I just want to place it in there and see if it's the right shape, the right value. I want to take my time. The eyes are commonly considered the windows to the soul, so I'm probably going to put my focal point there. So I really want to take my time to ease into the eyes and just make them just the most rich and powerful thing about it. Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit darker now and go ahead and start defining the upper lid. The eyebrows start underneath the eye socket, really, the glabella. They start underneath and twist over the top onto the front of the forehead. And then the eye itself, the iris, the border of the lower lid. Still keeping it fairly simple shapes. trying to just mind my shapes, values, and edges. Okay, and I'm flopping the canvas horizontally because that really helps me uh, see mistakes, because my eye will get used to looking at it from one point of view, and when you flip the canvas, it really shows proportions that are off or any glaring mistakes. So I can constantly flip the canvas like that throughout the painting process. All right, so I've given myself another value key, a dark, almost black value key in the dark range. So I'm still working the darks here. I haven't really touched the lights yet. And when I'm drawing and painting, the main thing that I do is I squint down and I look at my subject or whatever it is, and I squint way down until almost it goes black. And it really helps define the shapes, the family of darks, separating the family of lights. Those two things, that's the most simple decision I'm making up to this point, is defining those two value families and not mixing them up, keeping them separate. Because if they get mixed up, they look like mud, and I don't want that. So my tonal structure and my value structure, as well as my planes, the actual plane changes as structure, are going to really give my underdrawing and painting a veracity, a solidity that the audience won't necessarily know why, but it will register as this thing is real. It has life. There's a person there. And those tools, those foundational tools, are essential in me being able to achieve that goal consistently. So that the dark side, the shadow side of that eye, it's hard to see what's going on when you squint down, but I'm forcing myself to squint down and not see too much in there. I don't want to paint anything really I can't see. That's another kind of guideline, is when I squint down, if I don't see it, I don't paint it. It's kind of a Richard Schmidt painter trick. Keep it simple. You don't have to paint every detail. In fact, if you have areas of the painting that you just suggest against other areas of the painting that are really rendered and highly defined, that really creates a visual variety, and that visual variety creates interest to the audience, and that's what you want. You want them to be hanging around looking at your painting for a while. So I tend not to spell everything out, but I want the eye to move around the painting and have areas of rest and areas of where it moves through. And the areas of rest will be where I'll put the detail, where someone's eye can just linger there and notice. It's like an actor on the stage. It's like a composition in music. Same thing with art. I'm composing this piece, and like a conductor with an orchestra, you don't want every instrument and vocalist singing or playing at the same time, because then you can't hear anybody. So the conductor will have the violins come in and bring them up and quiet down the oboes and quiet down the percussion. And then you can hear them and their voice. If everybody's talking in a room, you can't hear what one particular person's saying. So if everybody else just quiets down, you can hear one particular person and actually hear what they're saying. So in my composing this painting, I'm balancing elements so that in the painting you have an area of focus, like a first read, and then a second read and a third read, so that there's sort of these levels of revelation in the painting. It's not all spelled out at once, not all coming at you at once with pure color, black and white value, big shapes, just all competing for attention. It's more a bit of a hierarchy there. So the layers of revelation ideas that the viewer can notice one thing at a time, or one or two things at a time, and then move on to something I've given less attention to, but there's still something there to kind of eat, so to speak, to have a meal there, to kind of dine on and savor, in a sense. And I've kind of gone into the light side now, and I'm putting in halftones under the eye, next to the nose. I put a little highlight on the nose just to give myself a little key to see where that light, not almost highlight value, will be in relation to the darks, and just to make it pop a little bit, to start to model this thing and make it look 3D. So I'm going to put that halftone in now on the forehead and come out of the darks into the light side and define the planes of the forehead, and the plane changes as it turns from front of the face to the side of the face. And doing the same thing with the chin. And the way that you start sculpting, getting that sculptural feel, is through value change. The way the eye will recognize value change is through, or form change is through value change. So value change equals form change. It's the way you kind of create the illusion of depth on a 2D surface. Another way to say that is different value equals a different plane. The same value will be the same plane. And I'm starting to detail the eye a little bit. Putting a placeholder for the pupil. Again, when I look at the photo, I can't see a lot in there. So I want to be careful to mind my values in the dark side. Because if I go put too much detail in there, and too much value change, it's going to jump out and start to compete with the eye on the light side, where there's a lot more contrast. So I don't want a lot of contrast in the value side, in the shadow side. It's what makes the shadow side characteristically shadow-like, is that there's not a lot of contrast in the shadows. So you can also see, as part of my interface here below the brush tool presets, I have what they call actions. And the actions are also part of the workflow that helps speed up the process dramatically. So I do have some actions that load certain kind of brushes quickly, just through hitting that button. I can load different kind of brushes. I can create a new layer. I can do a lot of different actions where I don't have to go to the menu bar and select the drop down menu and then select from different options there. I can just go ahead and click a button on the actions, and it does various different steps that I've recorded all at once with the click of a button. So that's really speeds up my workflow. I'm starting to see personality in here. I can see her. And that's that magic. The reason why we do something like this is to give the illusion of a personality, try to capture the essence of someone on paper. That's quite a feat. Now I'm just going to go ahead and hit the cheek with a bit of highlight. I'm trying to work where that shine is, because where you see the shine, that indicates a plane change. So it comes, if I can hit that shine and indicate a plane change, that helps with that sculptural sense of making the drawing look structural and kind of real. And a little shine right there by the tear duct, and then on the surface of the sclera there. Kind of work that. So on the light side, I want to kind of open my eyes up more. So I'm not squinting so much. Now I want to open them up a little bit more, and where I can see those finer gradations and value changes. Because again, form change is indicated by a value change. So when I start to lay a value down on the nose, let's say a little bit darker than that middle gray, it's going to just indicate that that plane goes back a little bit. I want to push it back in space. So it looks like the ball of the nose is coming forward. The same thing with the corner of the mouth. There's that little light. I'm hitting it with a lighter value, saying that the corner of the mouth steps out and then goes down. With the top part of the mouth, that lip there, it's got that real crisp white, almost crease there that divides the top lip from kind of that front of the face. I try not to zoom in too much. I keep my canvas just pretty zoomed out, because every stroke I make affects the whole painting. So if I'm zoomed in, I can't see that well. So I just I don't zoom in. I just make my brush size smaller and paint that way as long as I can, because again, it helps me see everything. I don't get lost in details that way. And when I'm putting in values, I like to kind of use these strokes, almost like a line decker kind of approach, where he's chiseling out and going along the surface in the direction of the plane change. And I can smooth those things out later. I like to keep them in because it keeps it structural. I like to keep that in for a while, and I can take it out later, but I don't want everything to be so airbrushy, because then it starts to all look like clouds, and I don't want that. I want things to be structural and plainer where they need to be, and soft and gradual. Those two things playing off of each other really, again, they create variety. The hair, I'm just drawing some little indication of hair here and there, but again, I'm trying to keep it like a big solid value with some hairs. Some hairs I'll pull out as individual hairs, but I don't need to draw each and every individual hair. It's just more like, what's the shape of the whole thing and what's the value? And that's enough to get me through most of the piece until the very end, and then I'll detail out with some individual hairs. So while I'm figuring out that shadow side, I wanted to talk a little bit about edges and edge control. And really, the power of edges is really something to grab hold of. And for one, it creates variety, that kind of lost and found edge, the hard, crisp edge against a lost, cloudy, fuzzy edge. It just does so much work. And I'm looking and going around and kind of doing an edge pass. And finding where I can keep it crisp edge, and finding where I can kind of, if I squint down and I lose the edge on the reference, then I will kind of blur the edge in my painting. And so now I'm just kind of blocking in a background, kind of a gradation back there, so that it's not just a flat gray, but that she's in an environment. And I'm using the smudge tool here, kind of an add water thing. I think I went too far, so I need to tone back the effect on that, turn it down a little bit. So here I'm adjusting edges, making smooth, kind of smudged edged transitions against the nice crisp edges. And you can see if you go too far, it starts looking like you lose the sculptural look or effect of the piece, and it just gets real flat, like where the chin meets the neck. I'm gonna have to fix that. So you don't want to overuse it, or everything becomes like soft, too soft. And now the lips, kind of finding highlights on that lower lip, the split of the lips, and kind of trying to keep it alive. I'm just constantly refining, fixing things. I kind of like to say drawing is just fixing mistakes for me, because most of the things, you put down these marks and they're not exactly right, and you fix it, and it's constantly doing that throughout the whole piece, and maybe realizing that something you thought was right wasn't, and you need to just refine it and fix it. And eventually you get there. It's kind of like you have a goal, you can see the end goal, and you make some mistakes, you make correct marks, incorrect marks, and fix the incorrect ones, and eventually, if you put enough time into it, you get there, you get a final piece. It's rarely that I put something down that's perfect. That's the goal, and that's why you practice, so that you can, more often than not, your drawings and your marks become more proficient, more accurate. Now I'm going to just use a selection tool to select out an area on her neck that has a very crisp edge between, or transition between, the hair and the beginning of the neck. So I just use the selection tool, and it creates that very crisp edge, and that's really crucial in that edge play, is the very crisp edges against the soft transition areas. Just kind of fix that transition between the chin and the neck. I'm going to fix something here. I think the ear is too far out. I'm going to pull it into the left a little bit more. Still sneaking up on that left eye and the shadows there. Just gradually, because again, I don't want to go too dark and then have it really pop out and start competing with the eye in the light side. Using the smudge tool again to adjust edges. Really helps to fix those gradual, subtle transitions, like at the corner of the mouth, coming into the cheek, near the chin, on the forehead, because she's a young girl, so she's got that beautiful, smooth skin. I don't want to put a lot of wrinkles there and structures and plane changes, because I want to play those things down on a pretty girl. You can see a lot of that hair. There's not a real definite boundary at the back of the hair between the background and the hair. Again, using the lasso tool to go ahead and make a shape, a clear shape. And if I get the right silhouette or the right shape, and then it's the right value and the right edge, then I've really, if I take care of those three things, the whole painting's going to work just fine. Really, to reduce complexity, I just think shapes, values, and edges. And I take care of those things throughout the whole painting process, and eventually I get there. These brushes are really nice because they can show the peaks and valleys of the paper. They kind of mimic charcoal paper or Canson paper that has a tooth to it, and when you run charcoal across it, the valleys don't pick up the charcoal, so they stay like the color of the paper, and then the charcoal rubs off on the peaks of the tooth of the paper. So this kind of brush in Photoshop mimics that. So you've got a little bit of noise coming through, a little bit of texture but nothing's as beautiful as that NuPastel, chalk pastel, or charcoal on paper. That's just digital. Comes close, but not. It's just not as beautiful as the natural medium. Like charcoal or NuPastel on newsprint is just beautiful. Just a note on Photoshop, making my brush bigger, I'm holding down the Control and Option key on the Mac, and on the fly, if I drag to the right, it makes the brush bigger, and if I drag to the left, the brush gets smaller. So those are the keys I'm using to adjust the brush size on the fly. So it's just couple of NuPastel brushes and the Add Water smudge brush. And those are the two basic tools I'm using for the whole piece. Now I'm using the Add Water smudge brush to blur out some of the hard edges. And it's those transitions in the shadows that are so difficult, and you can see me kind of working through it and fumbling through it because I'm not sure what I'm seeing in there, and I'm not sure how much information to put there. On that chin, you've got the shadow shape, you've got the core shadow and the reflected light in the shadow shape, and then it comes out into a halftone into the light side. So I'm trying to define that. Okay, I'm going to make an adjustment with the mouth. Probably needs to be a little wider, so usually the corner of the mouth lines up with the center of the pupil. If you draw a straight line down, you can find the corner of the mouth, and so I didn't go far out enough, so my mouth was a little too small. Really, with drawing, it's learning how to see, not so much learning how to draw. First, it's what am I looking at? Is it a dark thing or is it a light thing? What kind of shape is it? Is it a big shape? Is it a small shape? Is it a round shape? Is it more of a geometric shape? Those kind of really simple decisions, they're kind of design ideas, really make the drawing work in the end, because it gives it that solid foundation. And it's not about details like eyelashes, pupils, highlights, nostrils. It's none of that. That comes a lot later in the process, but so you're not copying, you're kind of conceiving the drawing, you're creating it. or recreating what it is that you're seeing. You're building it and then sculpting it. I'm trying to mess around with the back of the hair there. It's very unclear what's happening there. There's no real hard edges. So I'm trying to hold back and not paint anything too much there. I just want to make sure I get the overall shape and the value of the mass of the hair. I'm just trying to suggest what's going on back there. Working the cheek on the shadow side. And there is a bit of tonal variation there that does indicate plane change. It's very subtle, but where the mouth, the rhythm of the mouth meets the cheek, there's a little bit of plane change there, so I'll try to get that. And again, working the eye, so I'm coming back to the eye and working that up. And I'll continually move away, work on something else, and then come back to it. Again, it's like the orchestra conductor idea. You're making music, you're working the whole thing, all the parts in concert with each other. So you move around the whole piece and try to unify everything into one whole statement. So really part of the method is to break things down into manageable parts. Because when you look at something, the complexity of, let's say, a face or anything out there, it's overwhelming, especially the human figure. It's just overwhelming. You can't figure out what's going on there. There's so many things happening. So if you can break it down into manageable stages or phases or pieces or tasks, you can succeed in solving problems. Making sure you're breaking it down with good, clear descriptions. One thing connects to the other and it results in a finished painting. So because you have all these parts that look very complex, but because you broke it down into manageable parts, you're able to achieve that and not bail out during the middle and just saying, oh, I can't do it, or this really looks bad. And by the way, that's another challenge as an artist, is going through the muddy middle or the valley of the suck. Because it seems like in almost every painting, I'll go through that middle part where I've been looking at the painting for a long time. I might forget to take breaks, so I'm tired. My mind's tired, my body's tired, and I start to think, man, this sucks. This doesn't look good. Maybe I should just abandon it, give up, or, start a new one. And you've got that decision to, do I press on, or do I just, start a new one? And it's great place to be, actually, because when you get through it, if you keep going and you get through it, you really feel that you're growing. You've grown as an artist. You've answered questions. You've met challenges that maybe you weren't able to get through before. And that's rewarding as an artist. And, to successfully complete something like that. But you have to know that it's coming. You have to know that it's there all the time. But if you know it's a challenge, when it comes, you can recognize it and say, okay, I just have to be patient. I've got to go through this valley here. Now, let's just talk about the brush for a second. I'm working with the brush presets, the shape dynamics right now, and trying to figure out how this stroke is what it's gonna do, what the brush is gonna do when I put a stroke down. And I want it to mimic kind of like the striations in the collar of the sweater, and just to be the spacing to take it down a little bit so it creates a stutter step kind of thing. And I didn't really figure it out, so I just went ahead and started to just paint it. Guess I'll figure it out later. Okay, just using the select tool to quickly block in and dark the shadow part, the boundary of her shoulder on the shadow side. So again, kind of squinting down and saying, all right, what's a dark thing and what's the shape of it? And not trying to see too much variation in the value, just keeping it very simple. I'm not going black, even though it's pretty dark in there. I'm just keeping it middle black, drawing out some of those indications of material in the collar. Now I've reversed the selection so I can work outside the selection and still keep the crisp edge. And I just do Shift Command I, and that reverses the selection. And I can go back and forth, but if I want to keep that hard edge, I'll work inside and outside the selection while it's still selected. In any given area, I like to use the biggest brush possible to do the job. So you can see me scaling up the brush to work the dark area behind her neck. And just laying in value and strokes to cover the area. And then I can refine my brush size smaller and then work in and detail it out. Taking a little bit of license there with her neck and keeping it elongated and slim, just as a design choice there. So I have a nice mix of shapes in play, from the width of her head down to the narrow hourglass neck, and then back out to the torso. So we've got big, small, and medium shapes. That fuzzy bit of the hair, there's no real structure there, so I'm using lines to, again, create soft edges and blend the edges into the background and bring the background into the figure so that she's in an environment without really drawing an environment. Now I'm bringing that background closer into the value of her hair because, one, it brings the figure and the background together and integrates them into one whole. And also, what you bring together closer in value quiets it down so that it's not competing for the focal point, which is her eyes and her face. So whatever you bring together into a similar value range, it quiets them down, and whatever you separate out gets the attention. Okay, so we're coming up to the end of this painting, and I've just been refining, doing some edge passes, creating hard and soft edges where I think it will create interest, tweaking things, correcting things, small corrections, and hopefully I'm creating a clear story that you can get into about this girl and who she is, and there's some life there, just using shapes, values, edges. I'll do a little bit of vignetting at the bottom third, darkening up the values a little bit, and that will finish it off and just create that focal point and fine tune it so you look at her eyes. Thanks a lot for tuning in. I hope you learned something and enjoyed this video. Bye-bye.